exactly.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Ally.
Good
Good morning.
Morning.
Good to see you all here. Welcome. Joys and concerns for the new year. There must be some people with joy here.
Both of my grandsons one made Dean's List in college and the other one made honor roll for first semester. So I did it.
So that's the natural heritage is continuing down to your grandson. I see. Very good.
Well, as long as we're at it, my son made the Dean's List too in his first semester.
That's
But
quite
you also have your daughter here.
Well, she made the high honor roll for the sixth.
Oh, wow.
Always makes a high honor roll.
Yes, I'm just taking for granted.
Okay, and for that we say, Lord.
Hear our prayers.
Marie, you have an announcement for us.
Yeah, I got an email from our lead pastor, Pastor Jacob, saying that he would be willing to give a public comment at the city council meeting on January 21st. That's a Tuesday at 7 p.m. And the discussion is about, as you know, we have this contract extension coming up that's got a lot of coal in it. We're burning 80% coal now for our electricity. That contract extension will cause it to continue into the future to 2050 or 2055. So Pastor Jacob said he's willing to make a statement, and just so you know, the way it works, there's like a pictures clock up there with the countdown. You get 3 minutes.
Good luck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's first time we've heard of it.
What's the date for that?
21st.
The January 21st at 7 p.m. And the way it's structured is the city council, gathers, does roll call, does the pledge of allegiance, and then the public comment starts. So, and then they do the city business after that. So just so you know, the framework, normally we all sit there through everybody's public comment rather than, okay, well, we gave ours. So we're heading out. So just so you know, the format, they allow 10 public comments, then they do city business. And then if there are any more public comments left, they do them again. That's to prevent what they've had, city council meetings going until midnight. They'd rather not do that. It's cold and it's night. So anyway, if you can come and support, you can just sit in a seat, right? That shows numbers, shows support. You don't have to go up there and say anything. They don't allow any cheering, jeering, or booing. After each person's public comment. So, but the mayor always says those ground rules before the whole thing starts. So anyway, I just.
So we can't say amen after.
It doesn't say you can't say.
Marie, why don't you send me those details? I'll distribute it to the class, right?
Okay. Yeah, and a professor from North Central College will also be giving a public comment that night. So I'm really excited.
About the same topic?
Yes, same topic. Yep.
Okay, those rules, by the way, those rules for cheering, jeering, and.
Yeah, those are good rules. We ought to establish those.
Those for cheering.
Amen.
Lynn?
Okay, let's have a short prayer. Lord, as we begin, we recognize your presence. We offer thanks for this church, for all those saints that have given of their lives, supported groups, led groups, and encouraged people to be growing in their faith. For all those folks, Lord, we offer thanks. As we meet, open our hearts and minds, Lord, that we might learn and grow. In the name of Christ, amen.
Amen.
Okay, Al suggested this topic. I made some comments at a Wednesday morning Zoom about the church. and its history. And Al said, you know, that would be interesting for our group. So I spent the whole last week holed up in a Pandera restaurant while my wife was having fun with her sister. But it was really fun. So, so looking forward to sharing this with you. Special thanks to Naomi Can, who is here with us. Yay. She did a project for her Eagle Award, which was organizing the archives. And Susan Keaton is our archivist, and she was here on a Saturday to help me look at pictures. And of course, everybody that helped organize these archives that we have. I'm going to have a lot more pictures next week from that. So you can look forward to that. Today, we're going to be talking about the history of our congregation for the first 100 years or so. And next week, we're going to be talking about the history of the building that we're in. So briefly, our congregation has had several names. It was first known as Zion Evangelical Association, then later in 1912, First Evangelical Association, First Evangelical Church, the First Evangelical United Brethren Church, which is known as First EUB. And if you look at the plates downstairs, you will see a First EUB on those. And some people have asked, what's that EUB stand for? I grew up in the EUB church and very happy to share that. And then in 1968, the name was chosen Community because there was a First Evangelical United Brethren Church on this corner and a First Methodist Church on the other corner. So both churches chose new names. We've worshiped in 3 buildings. The Zion Evangelical Association building, which was on Van Buren, halfway between Eagle and Webster Streets. That was the first building. The east entrance was for women and the west for men. And there was a little fence down the center aisle that kept each gender on their appropriate side of the building.
And don't use that.
Yeah, but we look back at some of these things, it's hilarious. It was a major issue in that time. The church building, this building was the first church in DuPage County. So that's, and that building was moved to the Napier Settlement Museum. In 1858, the old brick church located on our present site on the corner of Center and Franklin was built, and the sanctuary was on the 2nd floor. So this is a second building to have the sanctuary on the 2nd floor. And the reason for that was that the church only owned the property for that side of the lot here. So this side of the lot was purchased later. So in order to get everything in, they had 2 stories.
The only way.
The current, in 1912, our current sanctuary and fellowship hall were built. And then in 1928, this building that we're currently in, the education was built. The building plan said that this education unit could accommodate 1,000 people on Sunday.
Wow.
Isn't that incredible, the vision they had? Well, our congregation began with Jacob Albright. In 1790, 3 of Jacob Albright's 6 children died of dysentery. He did not find comfort in his Lutheran church, of which he was a member, and he joined a Methodist small group because he considered the members of that group to be the most faithful Christians in their relationship with others. And he found that that was a very helpful relationship, and that was very significant in his rebirth in a new understanding of faith. Jacob Albright was the son of German immigrants who had been a drummer boy in the Revolutionary War. In 1790, he was a farmer and tile maker in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, where dysentery, as I said, took the lives of 3 of his 6 children. He was deeply disturbed. And at the time, he felt perhaps his lackadaisical understanding of his faith. He wasn't very active in his church, although he understood himself to be a Christian. So he was very, very troubled and wondered if he had some part in their death. And in a weekly Methodist small group, he found comfort in the Wesleyan theology of God's love, the promise of eternal life, and Wesley's emphasis on personal experience of God's presence. And in 1796, with this renewed faith, he began traveling and enthusiastically preaching to German-speaking people. He was very concerned at that time that the Methodist Church had circuit riders and were starting small groups. In some cases, churches were starting, but the German immigrants were not getting attention from the Methodist Church. So he really felt that as a German speaking, well, he was bilingual, spoke English and German, but as a bilingual person, he really felt a responsibility to share his renewed faith with the German population. So like the English-speaking Methodist circuit riders, Albright started small groups. He traveled in Eastern Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, starting and nurturing groups with regular visits. As German-speaking people responded to the message, he asked Methodist Bishop Francis Asbury to send ordained German-speaking preachers to lead communion. Asbury felt the future belonged to English speakers, and he declined to help Albright, but encouraged him to develop his mission to those who spoke the German language. Some years later, after Asbury had died, the next generation felt that there ought to be a German Methodist church, so that there was a conference for German-speaking people at a later time. Yes, go ahead.
Does our President Jacob know about this?
Did Jacob Albright know about what?
Know about this. Our pastor Jacob.
Oh, our Pastor Jacob. Pastor Jacob's been teaching a class similar to this for new
Yeah.
members.
Oh.
I think he does.
Okay.
So, yes, it's interesting that our church began with a man whose first name was Jacob and our pastor Jacob. Yeah. So these statistics to show how difficult it was. So after 4 years, in 1800, 3 groups were established with about 20 members. By 1807, the leaders decided they wanted to establish a denomination. So the Evangelical Association was founded with its first annual conference in 1807 with about 220 members. A modest start. And then shortly after that, let me continue. In English, Jacob Albright's groups were called first the New Methodist Conference, and then Albright Brethren, and then after Albright's death, the Evangelical Association. In German, the group called itself Evangelische Gemeinschaft, which is translated as Evangelical Association, but required a whole paragraph. So at North Central, my German professor was right down the hall from my office, Gregory Wolf. So I asked him, what does Gemeinschaft mean? And he said, well, it's the culture of small villages in Germany where everyone works together for the common good. Which he said, and he wanted to point it out to me very carefully, that this is in contrast to the individualism that's predominant in the United States. So he said, Gemeinschaft refers to the kind of village where everybody goes to the same church, everybody goes to baptisms, weddings, funerals. When there's a new barn that's to be built, everybody works together. Where there's a tragedy, everybody gathers together. Where there's a birth, there's older women that come and attend that. When there's an old person that needs care, there's people who stop by and bring food and help. And in my experience, when I was in high school, a tornado blew the barn that I had been in just a minute before it went down.
Oh,
It's really made me think about life. And it was pretty scary, but my dad and I were not injured. And within about 45 minutes or a half hour, where the clouds cleared, people began showing up. And within a couple hours, there were probably 20 people, neighbors, with trucks and chainsaws and chains and tractors, and pulled the barn apart. And all the cows were either rescued or removed to a pile for later. There was a retired farmer that came by and said, I sold my herd last week and I have a barn.
oh, wow.
And there was another guy who had a cattle truck and he said, well, let's load up these cattle. So within a few hours, the cattle were moved to a different barn. And the next morning, my dad milked and looked there until there was a new barn created several months later. And the next morning, church folks came with, coffee and donuts, and people with chainsaws and tractors, and pulled the barn apart so that there were piles of lumber to be used for burning, disposed of. And of course, nobody paid for any of that. That was all done because we were neighbors. And most of those folks were part of the church. And that was my personal experience of the mine shaft.
Wow.
So that's, and the term community was in 1968 was chosen partly because this understanding of being a church had community and personal relationships and fellowship hall and fellowship time as an important. And in the EUB church, there was a person on the executive administrative board whose responsibility was fellowship. That was not a part of the Methodist. It's not a part of the United Methodist. But the EUBs felt that dinners and fellowship time and working together, community building was a very important part of the church. Well, in 1808, just very shortly after founding the station, weary from traveling, Jacob Albright becomes ill and dies. He was probably ill for some time while traveling, and he went to a family that was a part of the church and died in his sleep. So kind of died with his boots on, really a fantastic servant. The Evangelical Association adopted a book of discipline, which was basically a German translation of the Methodist Book of Discipline. The religious revival that swept Pennsylvania and several eastern states, and the Evangelical Association grew significantly. Joe Napier, here in Naperville, in 1831, and his extended family traveled from northeastern Pennsylvania to establish a settlement along the Pries River. And probably you know about Joe Napier, I would assume. Several Evangelical Association families from northeastern Pennsylvania, maybe an adjacent county to where Joe Napier came to Naperville. And I have not seen a historical record that indicates there was a relationship between these families in Pennsylvania and Joe Napier, but given the similar geography, I'm guessing there was a connection. So several evangelical families from the same area traveled to Naperville. And 1 year after the first Germans from Warren County, Pennsylvania arrived in Naperville, 15 Evangelical Association people organized an Evangelical Association church in Naperville. And the first meetings were in homes or on the school that was on Scotts Hill, Franklin and Washington. And it doesn't say which corner of Franklin, Washington, but it's obviously very close to where our current building is. Well, Reverend Jacob Boaz was recorded as was the first preacher and preached the first sermon in 1837. He was here for months, and then he was called back to Ohio. And he assured the people that there would be another pastor coming. However, it was 6 months before another pastor came. And there were some unhappy folks here that made their wishes known to those folks that said, we came from Pennsylvania where there was a church, and we expected when we came here that there would be enough folks here to have a church. So for the next 10 years, there were 12 circuit riding pastors that stayed a year or less. So they were enthusiastic, but required lay leadership. So that was lay leadership were important to the church at that time. They kept the church going for 6 months without a pastor, and then made sure there were continuing pastors. Although I'm not sure they were here every Sunday. They were circuit riders, and they were serving other churches in the area as well as this congregation. So from the 1830s to 1890s, the political and economic turmoil in Germany stimulated more migration from Germany. German farmers and German residents of Naperville wrote to their friends and relatives in Pennsylvania or in Germany, encouraging them to settle in Naperville. Historians of early Naperville described the Zion Evangelical Church as one of the largest congregations, and it was growing as new German residents arrived. Of the first 7 churches in Naperville, 4 of them worshiped in German.
Wow.
So it was substantial. German remained the language of worship in this congregation until 1910. And on a Sunday afternoon, German language worship continued to 1955 when the German-speaking pastor passed away. So 1955, it continued. This is a drawing. It's in the history. There is a very good history of our congregation that was written for the 125th anniversary in 1962. And I used that in making this presentation. So this photo is from, or this drawing is from that book. So this is the first building, the first church building in DuPage County. It was on, as I said, Van Buren between Eagle and Webster Streets. The door on the west side is for men, and the door on the women, on the other, and the other door is for women and children. And this property was donated by Joe Neighbor. Joe Neighbor was very generous, and while he was not a part of this congregation, I don't know that he spoke German, but he felt it was important to have churches in the community. And I think that speaks about how he was welcoming people who came to Naperville and welcoming German-speaking people, by the way, people who did not speak his language. So the congregation, as I said, this first building is at the Naples settlement. When the congregation grew too large for the 1841 building on Van Buren, that building was sold to another church. I think it might have been a Lutheran church. There was a UCC church that was on that site at a later time. Eventually the building was purchased by Naples Settlement and moved to the Naples Settlement, where it's used as one of their facilities. Now, the second church building, by 1855, that's less than 20 years after the beginning of this congregation with 15 members, the congregation had outgrown this substantial frame building. And if you go to the Naples Settlement, it's not a small building. I mean, it's, a pretty good size for a first church building. The current property right here, Center Street in Van Buren, was purchased and a larger brick building was planned with fellowship hall on the first floor and sanctuary on the second floor. In 1858, the brick building was dedicated. It was the first church building in Naperville to be constructed of brick. So the second building, completed in 1858, became known as the Old Brick Church, since all Naperville church buildings at that time were frame construction. And as you see, it's a substantial building. You can see Center Street looks like it's unpaved. I'm sure it's 1858. They weren't doing really good pavement.
So Lynn, is the windows we see there, are those the windows that are in the library now?
I don't know that.
Yeah,
I don't know if anybody else knows that.
because there's like an edge of a building that kind of goes up to.
Oh, okay. Well,
I think that's.
Yeah,
I think it's probably new windows.
okay.
But this was a substantial building and it was, it looks like there's large stained glass windows. So it could be that the windows we have are from that building. That's possible, but I don't know that.
Lynn,
Well, there is an interesting connection to our current building, I think, here.
Lynn,
Yes.
if that's our building,
That's not our current building.
why does our current building not have a tower?
Well, okay, that's a very good question, and I'm going to answer that right now. Well, several years after construction, the bell tower shook when the bell was rung. So as a safety precaution, this bell was removed and the steeple dismantled. Could it be that the reason our current building does not have a steeple is because they took it down and they don't have a bell?
Why?
So I don't know. I couldn't find any place where that reasoning connected, but it seems reasonable.
Yeah.
So if they took the steeple down, when you build this new building, why would you put a steeple when it didn't work,
If there's no bell, you need a steeple.
Well,
Usually bell tower.
this, there's some sad stories relating to our history and the history of the denomination. While the Evangelical Association grew as German nationals immigrated to the United States and from Pennsylvania, differences of opinion appeared at the General Conference beginning in the 1870s. Challenges to the authority of bishops in making appointments was a source of conflict. Bishop John Jacob Escher, who lived in Chicago, was known as an authoritarian leader who many pastors and churches both respected and feared. Now, as a young pastor, Bishop Escher had been one of the most effective advocates for the founding of North Central College. For decades, Bishop Escher was the chair of the College Board of Trustees. So this very promising young pastor was elected bishop, and as bishop, by many accounts, he was very authoritarian and did not always follow the book of discipline. And they were people that I think appropriately were very upset about that. And one of the issues at the time was the editor of the National Church newspaper. He influenced more lay folks and church members than the bishop because this monthly paper was sent to everyone. And there was very little other communication about the church. So the editor that was appointed by the General Conference, not by a bishop, had a great deal of authority. So at a General Conference, the bishop asked the body to fire the editor of the paper. So, and Bishop Escher had visited a mission in Japan. When he returned, he wrote an article for the publication in this denominational newsletter that criticized the mission's director. the editor, whose brother was the director of refused to publish the article. Now, Bishop Escher was not happy about that. So, but at this general conference debate, Bishop Escher demonstrated his authoritarian style of leadership to clergy leaders across the denomination. So while he was located here in Illinois and responsible, I'm not sure exactly what states, but several states in this area, probably Iowa and Minnesota, maybe Indiana. So some pastors and church leaders became loyal to one of the three bishops who had differing styles of leadership using their authority. Many church members in the eastern states were third or fourth generation German Americans, and they expected democratic forms of church government. Now, Bishop Rudolph Dubbs, who was, I think, a second or third generation German, born in Pennsylvania, was the bishop for eastern states. Many church and Bishop Dubbs was followed the discipline, was much more listening to pastors and churches and the appointment system. Many church members in the Midwest were first or second generation German Americans and were more understanding of autocratic forms of church government. At the end of the General Conference of 1887, Bishop Escher announced the next General Conference would be in Indianapolis without allowing the appropriate committee to make the decision. So this appropriate committee later announced that the next General Conference would be in Philadelphia. So for 4 years, nobody made a concession or worked out this confusion. So Bishop Escher and the Midwest conferences prepared for General Conference in Indianapolis, and Bishop Dubbs and Eastern conferences prepared to meet in Philadelphia. So in intervening years, no one compromised. So in 1891, there were 2 general conferences. And there was a lot of confusion. And in 1894, those who objected to Bishop Escher chose to meet in Naperville to create a new denomination called the United Evangelical Association. And Bishop Dubbs was chosen as their bishop. The new denomination had identical book of discipline, doctrine of faith, but they had different bishops. So for several years, there were 4 worship services held within 3 blocks. There was an English and German, 2 different congregations that were associated with the Evangelical Association, with the Zion Church, and an Evangelical and German United Evangelical Association.
United.
Super united. For a long time now.
The president of North Central College, Dr. Henry Ressweiler, lost his job because he chose to worship with the United Evangelicals. Bishop Escher was the chair of the board of trustees. And of course, he kept the college formally related to the Evangelical Association, but college professors and students chose different groups. Some members of the Evangelical group occupied the old brick church and would not allow any other group to enter years. So the Zion Evangelical Association Church, even though they had this wonderful building, they worshiped in a room at North Central College. And after 2 years, they got a court order that evicted the trespassers. It's really an interesting history, isn't it? Well, in North Central, the board of trustees who objected to Bishop Escher were not informed of board meetings where new trustee members were elected. College professors and students were forced to choose sides. Some students who were preparing to become pastors in the Evangelical Association chose to join other denominations or other careers. I mean, it's, really some tragic things. Many Naperville pastors were shocked to see the animosity exhibited by the occupation of the old brick church. Many Naperville citizens lost their respect for the giant church that had previously been known as an effective witness for Christianity. While most of the disagreement can be attributed to personalities and stubborn leaders, there was one Wesley doctrine that was debated by each group. It was the doctrine of Christian perfection. Now, John Wesley believed that Christians were called to grow in their faith and obedience to God, growing in holiness after accepting God's grace in the life and teaching of Jesus is central to Wesley's life and preaching. But when Wesley was asked if a Christian could become perfect in his or her life, he gave different answers at different points. So the question of could a Christian become perfect in this earthly life was not resolved by Wesley, even though he felt growing in holiness was a lifelong endeavor. And that was very important to the Wesleyan movement. If you Googled Christian perfectionism, a Wikipedia article would appear, and it mentions how this is an important doctrine for Methodists.
If
But-
person did not become perfect, what happened?
Okay, say that again.
If a person did not become perfect, what happened to them?
Well, what happened? We are still all needed in need of God's grace and forgiveness. That continues. So this doctrine of Christian perfection discussion began to be not discussed after this animosity appeared. Yeah, the argument was solved by looking at what people actually did. And after a few years, tempers cooled and the foolishness of actions became apparent. Friends reconnected, churches cooperated on special services. Many church leaders regretted their actions, felt ashamed. Several church historians have glossed over this schism as events best forgotten. So the best place you find information about this split or schism is in local church histories. But the schism had articles that appeared in the New York Times. So this was a national news event at that time. Several years ago, I talked to Jim Stein, who's a member of this church, and he's a professor at Evangelical Theological Seminary here in Naperville when I was a student, and later a professor at Garrett Evangelical after the merger. And he felt that it was a personality issue. Although Bishop Esther was clearly out of line, and there was not a good way to resolve that. It would be difficult at that time. Bishops were elected for life, and a trial would be very difficult. And in this area, is president of the Board of Trustees at North Central. So, it's just very difficult to maybe no way to resolve that very easily, certainly. Well, there was a general conference in 1922 in Detroit that reunited the two denominations after, I think, 33 years. And when people came back together, the feeling was, what were we thinking? So then there was no need to resolve differences of faith or book of discipline. That was all the same. It just we can all work together now with the same bishop system. And 5 years later, in 1927, a celebration of the new denomination, which is called the Evangelical Church, which is one of the reasons why our name was changed, of course, was held in Pfeiffer Hall of North Central College, just a few blocks from here. And Zion Church became then First Evangelical Church. The Book of Discipline, adopted by the new Evangelical Church, had some changes. They established 4-year terms of service for bishops, not lifelong, with a provision for re-electing bishops for additional terms. Previously, the Evangelical Association had elected bishops for life following the practice of the Methodist Episcopal Church. District superintendents were elected, not chosen by the bishop, for 6-year terms. In the Methodist discipline at that time, district superintendents were chosen by the bishop. The election of bishops for 4-year terms and the election of district superintendents continued through the merger with the United Brother in 1946 until the 1968 merger with the Methodist Church. And EUB delegates, including Dick Tholen, who was a member of our church, a professor at professor at the seminary, Evangelical Theological Seminary, personal friend of mine, was a delegate to the General Conference in 1968. And he was strongly argued along with other former EVs for a term for bishops and district superintendents elected. And unfortunately, that for us in the EB system, that was not chosen, and the United Methodist Church continues with what the Methodist Episcopal had, which is electing bishops for life. We've not had problems like Bishop Esther, however. With the leadership from Zion Church and the Naperville community, $25,000 was donated to bring the Evangelical Association related Plainfield College to Naperville in 1870. And in 1868, when a court ruled that Wheaton would be the DuPage County seat, that's a much longer story. Some Wheaton folks stole the records at night from the courthouse here in Naperville. Yeah, not a really great story either. And a court ruled in favor of Wheaton. Naperville leaders, you can imagine, were very upset about that. And today, the Naperville North Central College football team, when they have a contest with the Wheaton football team, they have a bell that goes along with the winner. The bell symbolizes the bell that was stolen from the by Wheaton folks in 1867 or so. Plainfield College, and then located in Plainfield, was interested in moving to a location accessible by a train station. The Zion Evangelical Association Church, that's our congregation, encouraged the church's board of trustees to move to the college to Naperville and locate near its church building. So this congregation was an important part of getting what's now known as North Central College here. With the move to Naperville, the college known as Northwestern College at that time brought German-speaking professors and staff members and their wives and husbands who led Sunday school classes. One of the stories of that time was apparently they still had men and women on different sides. And women of college professors were not happy that they could not sit with their husbands. So somewhere, didn't really read where that changed, but somewhere in that time, bringing North Central folks here made some changes in this German-speaking church at that time. And some of the wives and female professors had leadership to the Women's Society of Christian Mission. Some of the college students attended worship. College students who felt called to ministry gave leadership to Zion's youth and young adult programs. Those who opposed Bishop Escher in Naperville created Grace Evangelical Church and built their church building at the northwest corner of Ellsworth and Van Buren, just a couple blocks from here. It's now owned by North Central College. For a couple of years, we had a contemporary worship service in the theater. There used to be the sanctuary of that building. Some of you remember that era. And that I thought that worked very well, but it was also very expensive to do that. And as you know, Grace Church sold that building to a Baptist church and moved south and built a new facility. And they have, I think, parking for 500 cars. But they, from about 1908 until 1970 or 71, they worshiped just a few blocks from here. With the death of Bishop Escher in 1901 and in 1905, new leadership at Zion Church, Grayson Church, and the college English congregation, cooperation between these congregations began with the youth and young adults. Of course, they didn't remember that kind of animosity. In 1908, the college congregation was known as Second Evangelical Association Church and wanted to build a chapel and asked for donations from the denomination and from this congregation. So in 1908, Zion Church began conversations with the church, the college's pastor and congregation, which included student, staff, faculty, and a few Naperville residents who did not understand the German language. The college church wanted to merge with Zion Church if regular Sunday worship was in English and a new facility could be built to accommodate the needs of students, which included a space for convocation speakers and fellowship dinners. So the question I want to leave you all with, it's a little difficult for me to ask this question because we're sitting in this building. Would the Zion Church tear down its beloved old brick church and build a new facility to accommodate the needs of college students and, of course, change their worship to English? For German folks who thought that God spoke in German, was a challenge. So that's so next week we're going to be talking about this building, and there's some pictures that I've made copies with for from the archives that you'll be seeing on the screen. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Okay,
More than John.
I'll come next week.
5 years.
I know.
We see you, Linda.
Hi, Scott.
Hey there.
Are you coming?
If you fold up your chairs and put them along the wall here, that would be good.
Interesting.
And yet we're supposed to be Christians.
I'm including welcome. Welcome. You said don't skip
Title of.
Somebody tell Lynn what a great job he did
There
on
are copies.
He did.
Yeah, you could ask Susan.
Hey,
Susan Pete.
talking to Iz right now.
Okay.
She can get you a copy of this.
Oh, okay. Great.
Okay,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
This has been
I know.
fascinating.
Good, good. Glad you enjoyed it.
About German. The whole town must have been.
Yeah, no, that's right. There were a lot of Germans here. Right.
Yeah.
I want to know what.
Oh, your neighbor that started. And of course, there were no English speaking. But I think the people that were coming to the United States at that time were significant of German immigrants. So this land was available and a lot of these German farmers. So they were farmland.